This again as a part of our 2025 Summer Forum. Many of you have joined us for the bulk of our Summer Forum events, so we're excited to see you all again here. If you're interested in seeing more opportunities from the Washington Council of Lawyers, one of our exciting opportunities that's coming up next is our Supreme Court view from the trenches. So if you'd like to see and learn more about this past Supreme Court term from the folks that practiced before the justices, you can definitely join us. That'll be next week on Tuesday, the 29th. I'm going to put that details in the chat, or those details are in the chat now. Many of you are already members of Washington Council of Lawyers, and thank you so much for joining our community. If you're not already a member, we highly recommend that you join. You'll get access to events like this and other similar events for free or discounted rate, as well as access to our Public Interest Jobs Clearinghouse, which is such an incredible resource for folks that are navigating a new and different job market. We published public interest positions in the legal field here in DC and around the country, as well as those that are JD Advantage and fellowship and internship opportunities. So definitely get a hold of that resource if you don't already have it. All right. And with that, I am going to kick our panel off. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. And I want to turn it over to David Stebb, who is the DC Resource, part of the DC Resource Bridge with Legal Aid and a member of our board.
Thank you, Chris. And hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today for the LGBTQ plus rights panel of the Summer Forum for the Washington Council of Lawyers. My name is David Stive, and I am on the board of the Washington Council of Lawyers, and I'm very pleased to be moderating today's discussion. In law school, I was very active with the LGBTQ plus student group at my school. And after that, I served for about 6 years as a pro bono volunteer for the Name and Gender Change Clinic at Whitman Walker Health. Today, I am joined by an amazing set of panelists who will briefly introduce themselves and describe their relevant experience before we turn to the rest of our conversation. Please put your questions in the chat as you think of them, and we will hopefully have time at the end of our discussion to address those questions. So without further ado, panelists, we'd love to start by having each of you briefly introduce yourself, letting us know where you work and your experience with regard to advocating on behalf of the LGBTQ plus community. And we can start with anyone, or I can choose. Arlie, why don't you start us off?
Happy to. Name starts with an A, so I often go first.
Yeah,
right?
there you go.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with you today. My name's Arlie Christian. I'm the Senior Policy Counsel at the ACLU, pronouns they or she. I am at the ACLU. I work in our Policy and Government Affairs office on trans justice work at the federal and state level. And I've been doing sort of policy work in the LGBTQ sphere for a while now. Before I was at the ACLU, I've been here about 5 years now. Before that, I was over at the National Center for Transgender Equality as our state policy director, doing state level policies that support the lives of trans folks across the country. Before that, I was over at Whitman Walker, working at the Name and Gender Change Clinic. Shout out to Amy for being my very first legal boss. And I went to law school at Washington College of Law here in DC, where both David and Christina helped in our Office of Public Interest and helped me find my way as a public interest lawyer. So that's a little bit about me. Lauren, I can pass it to you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Pruitt, and I'm the legal director at Free State Justice. I went to Howard University for undergrad and Georgetown for law school. When I was at Georgetown, unlike David, we didn't have the outlaw program, but I was part of the juvenile justice clinic, which taught me a lot about working with underprivileged communities. And so really appreciated that experience. I've been advocating for legal services for the LGBTQ plus community with Free State for over 6 years now. Along with providing direct legal services, my experience includes working on initiatives that promote inclusivity, support for LGBTQ plus individuals, participating in numerous community outreach programs, and then collaborating with other organizations to raise awareness, advocate for pro LGBTQ plus legislation in Maryland, and then, of course, to drive overall social change. And I will pass to Donald.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donald Cooley. I'm a counsel here at Latham and Watkins. I went to UNC Chapel Hill for undergrad and NYU for law school. I was a member of Outlaw and Law School, and I have, for the last kind of 10 years, kind of devoted my entire pro bono practice to doing outreach for my community. Have also, shout out to Amy and Whitman Walker, for the last 8 years, have been a volunteer with the Name and Ginger Taint Clinic. I'm looking forward to talking to you more about the pro bono opportunities here in DC. And I will pass it, I think, to Amy.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Amy Nelson, she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Legal Services at Whitman Walker Health. I'm really thrilled to be with this amazing team today and to talk to you all about what's happening in the world and how you might get more involved. It seems that we're giving our background, so college background. So I'm from Texas, proud Texan until Texas turned into a bad place, and now I'm not so proud. But I went to GW for law school and then have been here at Whitman Walker for about 17 years. And we work on things related to generally under the umbrella of healthy living, safe living for folks who are dealing with chronic health conditions and generally have limited to no resources. So we do a lot of public benefits, we do immigration, we do estate planning, we do a lot of name change, as you've heard, and then we do some discrimination works. And we're very thrilled to partner with everyone you see on the screen here today. So thanks for having me. Oh, and I'll pass it to Donald. Oh, Donald already went.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I think we got everybody. Chris, is there a way to pin Amy? I know she was pinned before, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my computer dropped and then it came back.
Oh, okay. That might have been what happened. But thank you all, yes, for those introductions. I guess we will now call Amy Legal Boss. That's your new your new nickname. You're Arlie's first legal boss, and I'm like, yeah, legal boss. I like that. So I'd like to pose this next question to Lauren. Lauren, there have been a lot of harmful changes recently with regard to LGBTQ plus rights. And I'm wondering what have been some of the major setbacks for your client communities?
I probably could talk the whole hour, but I'll try to be as brief as a lawyer can be. We have just seen and witnessed significant setbacks for LGBTQ plus protections and rights, particularly due to the introduction of legislation that rolls back our anti-discrimination protections. This rollback has affected folks relating to employment, housing, healthcare, education, especially transgender individuals who are seeking gender affirming care, which I just call healthcare. Additionally, there's been a rise in anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric and policies, especially policies that target the youth, bans on discussions of sexual orientation and gender identity in schools, like we recently saw with the harmful Supreme Court decision in Mahmoud v. Taylor. These actions, overall just create a hostile environment for LGBTQ plus individuals, students, families, and deny them access to support and resources that they need. I've also seen the reduction of protections and recognition for same-sex marriage. Obviously, it's still on the books, but if every day you're wondering if there's going to be a change that takes away your familial structure, that can be, an area that is just anxiety driven, and folks are extremely nervous about how to protect their family structure, their marriage, their assets, how to protect their children, how to make sure they have access to children. in, it used to be kind of thinking about international travel, but even in domestic travel, if something happens, am I going to be allowed into a hospital room or on an ambulance with my own child? Another example that we've seen, this was following the issuance of one of Trump's executive orders, the one that kind of shifts the focus in federal contracting away from diversity, equity, and inclusion towards what they, term a merit-based system. And, several concerns that have come from just, again, uncertainty and anxiety regarding the implications for workplace inclusivity, and especially support for LGBTQ plus individuals. When you have prohibitions to diversity and equity and inclusion in the workplace, this leads to discrimination, leads to harassment. We've seen the EEOC put forth policies and memos relating to removing protections or deprioritizing discrimination complaints related to gender identity. And this is obviously a huge concern to the LGBTQ plus community, especially trans community. And then, of course, we see that, persons of color are impacted even more so, within the community when you have such harmful policies that are not just within the federal government, but also translating into the private sector, and in the military, and other aspects of folks' lives. Um, there's also a concern with organizations such as mine that are nonprofits who are experiencing disruptions in funding, disruptions in tracking diversity metrics, which ensures accountability, drives continuous improvement for folks in their communities. And so, overall lack of commitment to diversity is generally just viewed as detrimental. Not only to minority communities, but also the organizations that benefit from having a diverse range of employment, talent, and perspectives in their decision making. So, I'm glad that we're going to end at a high point later, but it's just a note that we are seeing these attacks. They are, again, in kind of every aspect of an individual's life. And so it's so much more important that, within this climate of fear and uncertainty, we have programs like this that can help folks reach out for resources, that can help folks, better understand, the impacts of like the executive orders versus, your state and local protections. And despite all these challenges, we have definitely seen the LGBTQ plus community demonstrate remarkable resilience and determination to continue to fight for their protections and expanded protections at that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. I mean, um, I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that. I'm like hoping not, right? Like hopefully that's the full list of the really harmful changes that we've seen, but I don't know if anyone has anything to add. All right, well, I'll give this next question to Donald. Donald, what are some pro bono opportunities that exist to support LGBTQ plus community members in the district?
Yeah, thanks, David. I guess I was going to jump in there. I don't know if this is to add or whatever, but I do think that what Lauren kind of hit on is that we find ourselves in this really unique opportunity where there's a lot of challenges, but there also is a lot of situations where people, both legal professionals, but also law students, can kind of help support organizations that might be feeling stressed with, lack of resources or lack of bodies. I think, from the law firm situation, we've kind of been kind of raising our hands, telling our partners, our pro bono partners, hey, what can we do to help? We know that people might be stretched financially. We know that people might be stretched, with just resources or people to do the work. So as I mentioned earlier, my pro bono practice has largely been transgender name changes. I am a transactional lawyer by trade, so I am terrified to death to appear in court. But I've been, doing transgender name changes for over a decade. But there's also a number of opportunities that you can go through with the DC Pro Bono Center. Our community needs help with a number of issues, whether it be wills, whether it be immigration, whether it be, helping small business owners do incorporation for their communities and for their businesses. And a lot of the times, I think one thing that I learned when I was starting to do the name changes is even things like applying for a license or things that you would think would be really simple, I don't understand how people do it without legal assistance, right? And so there's so many ways in which, even as an early attorney, you can get involved with a number of organizations in DC that can help people navigate some of the red tape and the bureaucracy that unfortunately we created. And unfortunately, diverse communities are disadvantaged and don't have access to. I would, obviously would be remiss without shouting out Whitman Walker because I do think they have a number of different opportunities, and I will obviously let Amy speak to them more eloquently than me. But it's really easy to get involved, and it's really, for me, been a way to kind of feel that I'm directly impacting my community in a way that my actual practice normally doesn't allow me to. And it's also a way to have kind of tangible results, even when you're doom scrolling and you feel like, there's not much that you can do. Being able to actually help someone change their name or change their gender identity marker, it's the biggest thing for them, even if it's something so trivial to us. And so I think I would really encourage people to try to find opportunities that can help you make a difference, even if it's, just 1 or 2 hours of your day.
Amy, did you have anything to add?
Well, as I said, I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you, Donald, for your many, many, many years of volunteerism with Whitman Walker, and the same for everyone else. I thought Lauren did an amazing job of describing the many things that are happening, and it's really overwhelming. I was reading something this morning talking about, the intent here is to overwhelm, confuse, and disempower us, and essentially exhaust us, right? And so staying engaged takes energy. Maybe today it takes more energy than it ever did before. And I echoed those observations that helping one person with a name change, helping someone obtain an accurate identity document is a huge game changer, particularly in today's world. And that is a great opportunity to have an impact with a single client. And you don't need to be an expert, right? You don't need to be a litigator. You don't need to know. I tell people, if you've moved from one state to another and had to re-register your car or get a new driver's license, or otherwise deal with some administrative issues, you are prepared. And so many times our clients are dismissed simply because of the way they present, right? The way they look when they show up at the clerk's counter. And so having a lawyer there next to them, gives them the power and the agency to do a little bit more, because our systems are so biased, which of course fundamentally is the truth. But in today's world, I think more people feel empowered to discriminate against trans and non-binary folks, and that's just heartbreaking. So but we welcome volunteers for our name and gender change work.
Yeah, and I appreciate, Donald, your mentioning sort of the range of opportunities. I mean, whether it be preparing wills or working on immigration matters. I mean, someone's being a member of the LGBTQ plus community can have impacts on all sorts of legal issues. And there's lots of volunteer work to be done. Amy, I wanted to, as we're talking about sort of lawyers thinking about taking action to support the LGBTQ plus community, some of those lawyers are also members of the community. So I wanted to ask you, Amy, do you have any advice for an early career lawyer who's part of the LGBTQ plus community and is sort of seeking guidance on how to own their identity while also navigating professional spaces?
Yes, great question, David. And I think back to how I navigated and managed these issues when I was a law student 30 plus years ago. And I hope that the landscape has changed significantly, right? Back in the day, I think David may remember this, he may be of my generation, where people had pink resumes and not pink resumes, depending on who you were applying to jobs for. And then, that's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. There we go. So I think I have a couple of sort of concrete suggestions here that I think are helpful, and I hope you find them to be helpful. The first one is to target and identify what type of work you want to be doing or what issue speaks to you so that you have some agency and ownership, right? When you're meeting people, you're not just Amy Nelson, the law student. You're Amy Nelson, the law student who's interested in XYZ issues and has some expertise in those issues, at least as a novice attorney. I think it's important to identify what speaks to you and then build experiences in that field through both volunteer work and interactions with other folks at community events, whether it be an academic event or fundraiser or some sort of community organizing. And what I find is that through these connections, this ultimately frequently can lead to paid work. I also think it's important in terms of sort of grounding who you are and your identity is to connect to people like you or people who you want to aspire to be. If you think to yourself, oh, I really want to do policy work on the state level. Oh, Arlie did that at NCTE. Let me reach out to Arlie so that I can pick Arlie's brain and ask some questions and just become familiar perhaps with Arlie's approach and their own journey, to how they got there. I think networking can't be understated. There's power in numbers, right? Like when you walk into the room, if you happen to be the only queer, it helps that you know other people in the room or they know you for the work you've done or the volunteerism you've done or the contributions you've made, perhaps through writing articles or commenting on other folks' work. And then the last piece is to encourage you to volunteer, to get on committees, get on boards that reflect your values and your community interests. And again, doesn't have to be a board of a queer organization, but as we know, all of our issues intersect with other social justice matters. And so if there's something that you feel drawn to, whether it's housing justice or environmental justice, voting rights, there's always an overlap with the queer angle. And I encourage you to pursue those volunteer opportunities again, to lead to both relationships and also potentially unpaid or paid work opportunities.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful advice. Does anyone else have anything to add on that point? Just sort of navigating professional spaces as a LGBTQ plus community member.
I was just going to say, just find your people. I think that is very important just in any space. I think being different and being diverse, you always need to have your people and your support network. There's always going to be moments in time where you kind of need a sense of community and a sense of support, and whether that be, you have that person that's down the hall, whether it be the person that, you can call up, just having a support network. Because I do think that sometimes, especially given the culture and environment that we're in, it does sometimes feel like you're in it by yourself, or that people don't really understand, oh yeah, like as Lauren was mentioning, you're thinking about marriage security or your children, and your colleagues might not have the same concerns. And so things that might not be a big deal to them, and they're just going on living their day to day, and you're really kind of just struggling internally. So being able to kind of lean on a network, whether that be internally or externally, having your people is really important to help you kind of continue to process as you're going through your work. Because I think it's really hard to do it all by yourself. So just find your people.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about just the impacts that all of the changes are having on individuals, not in lots of different aspects of their lives. And I know there's been a lot lately. There's been a lot of sort of rhetoric, and there's also been a lot of changes to the law. And I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about how your client communities are sort of being impacted by both of those things, because I would imagine there's the question of like tangibly what they're able to accomplish, the barriers that they're bumping up against, but also just the environment and how that's impacting sort of their mood or their state.
Well, Arlie, did you want to start off? I'll start with just a very dark place in hopes that other people will raise us to a happier topic. But a big part of our practice at Whitman Walker is to do immigration work, and we specialize in immigration work for folks whose claims relate to their gender identity, their sexual orientation, and or their HIV status. And I think we all know from reading headlines or not, the chill that has been placed upon immigrants and their families and their advocates. The overreach and the illegality of what the federal government is doing is absolutely shocking and absurd. On my team, we have about 12 folks. We have 3 immigrants, and they all have incredible stories of what they have witnessed and what they have lived through and what fears they have in today's world. And I think we are all very mindful of the stressors that they're dealing with and trying to figure out how to support them, how to keep them safe, and how to remind them that we are here to support them. And the same goes for our clients, right? We have a lot of trans immigrant clients who are seeking asylum, and they may or may not find themselves at the crosshairs of some, again, illegal administrative intent or jockeying that would leave them vulnerable to ICE pickup, essentially kidnapping and detention. And to stay vigilant and stay connected to Donald's point, right? To find your people and stay up to date and stay connected, because that's what keeps us strong. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, sort of relatedly, like rights only matter if you believe you have rights, right? And so in this moment when we are seeing so many attacks on the rights of vulnerable populations, whether it is, immigrants, whether it is trans folks, whether all sorts of minority populations are feeling that attack right now. And so that confusion, that constant like influx of, did they take away my access to healthcare? Did they take away, am I going to be picked up by ICE? Is that that it's a huge stressor, but it's also it makes it less likely that people will go and access their rights. And I think that's where the support of organizations like Free State, like Whitman Walker, the support of pro bono attorneys at this moment is so important, because we have to push back on that that feeling that the entire federal government is out to get you, and that that your rights no longer exist. And so really, having someone come and say, no, you can still access a state ID that reflects who you are, and you can still access healthcare, you can still get these protections, that's so critical right now when people are facing just an onslaught of information, misinformation, and attacks on sort of minority populations.
Yeah,
That's a great point. Yeah, go ahead.
If I could add just an example of that with the State Department, after the initial one of the many executive orders decided to take away folks' right to update their gender marker on their passport, take away the X marker on the passport, and then after the Orr v. Chump ruling and the injunction, now they've just kind of added it back, that not in the same fanfare as they took it away. And when talking about that with clients, the first thing they're kind of saying is like, oh, I'm just going to end up on a list somewhere. And there is that fear, and that's kind of with everything. I mean, even accessing fertility care for same-sex couples, there's an idea of ending up on a list, or some other way in which they're tracking their family. And so having knowledge of, like, for example, in Maryland we have an affidavit of parentage where technically you wouldn't have to go through a second parent adoption. Both parents could end up on the child's birth certificate in certain circumstances, even if there's only one parent that's the biological parent. So there, there are a lot of options in different jurisdictions, and that's the other thing is that it's, very different. You live in Maryland, DC, Virginia. I've had people tell me about experiences of other folks like, oh, can't I just do that? And then I dig deeper and find out that that person lived in Delaware or Pennsylvania. And they're just like, but they did it. Why can't I do the same thing? So, having access to legal assistance is imperative, and that's why like Free State and Whitman Walker are having a pro bono panel is so important, because we all have small staffs. We can't possibly do all the work ourselves. And the one other thing I was going to mention was just in the Mahmoud v. Taylor, or I mean, it's following the book bans and when I grew up in the 80s, you could always opt out of, sexual education for your kids if you wanted to, provide that education in a different way and not, have them go through the normal class with the school. That was always an option for parents. But this idea that they could just opt out of, having their child hear about gender identity or sexual orientation outside of a sexual education class is just it's just there's just no words for it. The time wasting, the singling out, the lack of visibility for those children who are either LGBTQ plus themselves or their parents are. I just only imagine my kids if they just talk about our family vacation and have to wait for 3 or 4 kids to get up before they mention two moms. I just don't know how that is, that their freedom of speech is overridden by, a parent's some sort of freedom of religious expression, is just so counter to what we have always known about our First Amendment rights, and the protections that we all have. And so, it's just really, really important that we are thinking about protections, broadly and really trying to give people access to information because that's what's going to be the most important thing for them to navigate, all of the information they're getting and also to like counter all the misinformation.
Yeah, you all have mentioned sort of like an overarching sense that like all of my rights are being taken away, but in spite of that, it's important to remember that some rights are still there, that you still have rights. We've also talked about changes, things changing, flip-flopping, going back and forth, and just the importance of having information. Are there particular resources that you would recommend to sort of like keep on top of all of these changes and everything that's happening and where things stand at the current moment? Or maybe there's no one place to go for that, but.
I mean, in my like our trainings that I do, I always provide like a long list of resources because it really does depend on what information a person is searching for. I mean, I still access, and I apologize, I'll probably get the name wrong, but um NCTE, what is it, A4TE now? But I'll still use like their document ID center as like a first step and then go and look at, like what changes may have happened to Texas or New Orleans or Louisiana or something like that to get, the up-to-date information. But it's always nice to start there to get like their summary of what the policies are relating to like changing someone's gender identity on state documents or in the Department of Vital Statistics there. So there's always organizations that you can kind of go to. I know at Free State we try to put a lot of information out on our social media, on our website, access blogs. But I know, like, I follow ACLU of Maryland to like get, stay up to date on like Supreme Court cases. They get a good sense of like, Maryland specific information. But if I want national, I may look at ACLU National. I may look at Lambda Legal. We have been working at Free State a lot with HIV decriminalization. So, kind of following, some of the healthcare protections and policies and issues that Whitman Walker talks about. I mean, there's so many places you can go. I think you just have to find what works for you as far as how they synthesize the information, how they put it out. Some are very like, this is great for that law student that loves to read Supreme Court decisions, and others are, more general for like the average population. So, but I think it's just important to find, good, solid information, always thinking about why are they telling me this? And if it doesn't sound right, like if you're hearing like breaking news and it's just on, one person's Facebook page, that may not be accurate. So, looking to, find out if, and like go to the Supreme Court's webpage, go to, these nonprofit organizations that are, here to provide good information, solid information, to help you with like your decision making, especially if, for college students and law students, if you're thinking about where to take the bar, really think about what's going on in these states. I can't express that enough, because if you end up at a state where you don't have access to health care, where, they're minimizing, familial protections for LGBTQ plus individuals, it's hard to get out of it once you've taken a bar. I never want to take another bar. So if I had to like, really like weigh two states, like those are the things that I'm thinking about.
That's an excellent point. Amy, I was born in Texas and I lived there for 8 years, but only 8 years at the beginning there. Um, but speaking of, different states and where you might choose to live and how important that can be. And these are also just really useful reminders that like the law is different in different states. And so, when you're looking for information, make sure you're looking for local information or information specific to the state that you're thinking about. And I saw that Amy put a website in the chat as a useful reference. I don't know if anyone had any others specific, sites or references that you thought would be helpful.
David, we can also share any information, links, and resources in the follow-up email. So give folks a little bit more time to digest. So I'll reach back out to our panelists to get that if folks
Great.
have a go-to list that they don't want to access right now.
That sounds great. We did want to try to end on sort of a positive and inspiring note. So I'll do that with a question to Arlie. Arlie, can you describe some recent victories with regard to LGBTQ plus rights?
Yes, how refreshing to get to be like the bearer of good news in these days. Lauren, I feel like you took the brunt of like all of the sad attack news. So thank you. But I do think I'm glad you all are ending on this note, because I think this is a moment where, despite the overwhelmingness and all of the bad news and just the onslaught of news, like Amy said, like it's just constant, and even keeping up is attacks on all of our mental health. It's really important to keep our victories in mind and our supporters in mind. Like, I think that is something that gives clients a lot of hope. That's something that gives our communities a lot of hope in this moment when we're feeling so many attacks happen. So, I mean, certainly one recent victory that came to mind, Lauren, you talked about this already, was the Orr v. Trump passport case. So, all of the executive order, not all, but many of the executive orders that Trump issued in his first few days were, again, meant to distract and overwhelm all of us who are defending civil rights in various ways. And there were a lot of lawsuits afterwards. And there's been a lot of success in pushing back on so many of those administrative actions and federal government actions, because they were unlawful. And so one of those was the rollback of the passport gender change policy. And I think it's very exciting for our trans community to see, oh my gosh, we got, it was horrifying to overnight be cut off from access to accurate passports. People literally had passport applications in with the State Department, and that the next day they were put on hold for weeks, and then they were denied, and they were issued a passport that did not match who they are. And that is a horrifying thing. It made many people afraid to travel. People are afraid to travel for a lot of reasons, but particularly in the trans community, that's been a huge fear since since January. And so the passport case, we, received an injunction first on behalf of the clients that are in the lawsuit, and then we applied for ACLU and Lambda and our partners applied for a class certification so that anyone who is harmed by the Trump administration's passport policy could be protected by this injunction and could go to the State Department and ask for a passport that has the appropriate gender marker of M, F, or X that matches who they are. And Lauren, you certainly mentioned like there's fear that comes with that. There's misunderstanding. There's just a lot of complications. So I do think part of our job as legal advocates for the community is to make sure people understand, what are their rights and what are their risks. Passport applications do have privacy protections under federal law. How much trust we have in privacy protections these days is, a difficult conversation, but one that I think we as legal advocates are a little more equipped to give people information on. So I think that's been a nice win to hold up. I think one of the biggest themes of wins I'll point to is allies standing up in support, particularly of our most marginalized communities, right? And I'm thinking about, we've seen, for example, state pushback, state legislatures who are passing what we call shield laws, right? So since the Dobbs decision a few years ago, providers of abortion care and gender affirming care have been afraid, rightfully so, for their lives, for their livelihood, for their ability to continue to provide that care. And state legislatures in 14 states now have passed shield laws saying, in this state, we will protect you all as providers. We will protect our clinics. We will do everything we can to make sure that you all can continue to provide the life-saving healthcare that you provide. And that kind of solidarity with folks to get people what they need and to get providers the feeling of safety that they need is so important. We've seen a lot of attorney generals stand up in this moment. So when the executive order came out banning trans folks from serving in the military, there was another lawsuit which has made some good progress, and we saw 20 different attorney generals join an amicus brief saying that they will fight, for trans service members in court. There was a quote from A.G. Brown in Maryland, right, that said, "This ban dishonors every service member who makes sacrifices to protect our freedom to be our true selves." And just really, seeing attorney generals stand up and defend trans people, I think is so important to so many community members. We saw that from the governor of Maine, right, Governor Mills, when she went to her Governor Association dinner, and Trump said, we're going to make your schools kick trans kids out of school sports. And the governor said, well, I'll see you in court, right? And she will. And, one of the Department of Agriculture tried to cut their school funding, and they went to court and they said, absolutely not. That is unlawful, and pushed back and won, right? And that, that case is still scheduled for court, I think in 2026, but really important standing up to the bullying of the federal administration of a small minority population. We've seen it a lot from attorney generals on defending access to gender affirming care. And again, that's such an important thing to know, that legal folks, your attorney general in your state is standing up and saying, absolutely not. When the executive order about access to trans care came out, trying to cut off access to care, I think 14 different AGs signed onto a statement saying they'll continue to enforce state law, provide access to care, they'll challenge these unlawful efforts of the Trump administration. So I just think that those types of actions, standing up, whether it's out loud, whether it's quietly, whether it's, you as a pro bono person with a community member, or whether it's like on social media, in the news, anything we can do in this moment. And it really takes all of us to push back against abuses of power and attacks on minority population. That's the work we need to continue to do to defend our democracy. So it's happening slowly but surely, and I hope we just continue to focus on those victories and continue to fight back.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, and just that reminder that Just because an action is taken doesn't mean that it's lawful, doesn't mean that it's going to stick, doesn't mean that it's going to succeed, and that people do fight back and say, not so fast. You can't do that, right? So it's not, so when there's a disappointment or a discouragement, it's not the end of the story. Yeah. Any other victories that people wanted to mention? Positive notes?
I'll just share a few victories. In the last few months, we've had 3 asylum victories for trans folks. And it's a reminder to me that there are good people who still work in the immigration system. That's particularly true in the Mid-Atlantic area. While headlines, the negative dark headlines, get all the attention, there are still a lot of good people, including at the State Department, right, who are helping us with passports. There are good people in government who are trying to do the right thing and trying to continue to do the right thing. And we've been absolutely, as somebody said earlier, we have those victories, you have to hold on to them. And we have been holding on tightly to some recent asylum wins.
That's great news. And a good reminder that, yeah, that these systems we're talking about, they are vast, and there are still people within the system who are doing the right thing, complying with the law, who want to see justice actually prevail.
And I was just going to add, I think the kind of increased visibility and representation, whether it's in media, in politics, in private sector, government agencies, I think that contributes to a greater awareness relating to the issues that are closely affecting the LGBTQ plus community, and also just the community in general's acceptance. I've gotten, at Free State, we've gotten so many more requests for, community outreach, for presentations, for, inclusivity, panels and trainings for private corporations and government agencies and the judiciary. Everyone wants to know more. They want to know how they can be more inclusive. They want to know how, the things that will make, diversity, make everyone better. And it's funny, I always do those trainings and always want to remind folks that, it's really hard to, keep, even if you're like, oh, I'll just make my org a little bit more inclusive for LGBTQ folks, it's hard to do that and not make it more inclusive for everyone. So everyone feels more included, whether you're part of a marginalized background or some other sector of the community, you will feel more welcomed, more included. There would be less mistakes relating to misgendering folks, whether it's related to a person's gender identity or just like assumptions that people make about people's names or a tone of voice or there's just so many things that just make it better for all of us and kind of allow us to live together and promote social acceptance that we're seeing now than we saw before. So that's a bright light for me in the work that we're doing, and being able to partner with all these different folks is just been great. And the visibility has been immense.
I just want to give a shout out to Lauren, who partnered with one of my colleagues to do a training for the judiciary recently. And I know that it was so impactful, and you opened eyes and you facilitated some difficult conversations, and you did such a great job. And as you said, outreach in whatever setting is so important.
I know that we wanted to leave some time for questions. I don't know, Chris, if there are questions in the chat, or if anyone in the audience wants to put a question in the chat now, we do have some time to take your questions.
We do have one question we can kick off with, and then if anyone has anything else to add. The question is from Belle in the chat. I'm going to just read it and then allow folks to respond. So the question is, outlaw chapters often accept donations from private sector firms and engage and engages in recruiting, offering up our community to sometimes harmful and hostile firms. As leader in outlaw chapters or as members, how can we as law students support each other and stick by our morals, activism, social justice initiatives? Recognizing that we cannot cut ties with these firms because LGBTQ plus students will end up working there and because we need their money for our programming. But at the same time, some of the work these firms do directly target and harm the LGBTQ plus communities and the communities we stand in solidarity with. So I think the question really is, how do we balance working with law firms and accepting some of the benefits while also navigating some of the drawbacks?
Well, I would say, and we all do this as nonprofits. We are always looking for private funding, even federal funding. Obviously, in this climate, means that you're receiving funding from folks that are like anti to everything that you believe, but our states need the funding for like their victim services, for so many different things, obviously education. So I don't want you to think that this is limited to obviously the outlaw chapters. But I think the best thing that I've seen working and I came from corporate law before Free State. The one thing that I saw that changed um, the hearts and minds at at the kind of the big law firms was just having LGBTQ plus attorneys that work there. We were able to, we saw things a little differently. We dressed a little differently. We talked with clients a little differently. We, just in a good way. And I had a number of folks that were like almost like, you're so normal. And so a lot of times, the people that are the most like, want to put you in a box and want to, put you to the side and don't think that you should be there, like they've never met you. And so, working with those law firms and being in, summer associates and being in their programs and inviting them to your programs, I think, they will realize that this is some talent that we cannot afford to lose. The one thing I always say when I do like my employment talks with undergrad students, I'm like, ask them about their diversity programs. Put it back on them, because when they're like, oh, yeah, we don't have any affinity groups, we don't have any, it's like that means you don't really, put effort and money back into, your employees. And if enough of us are asking those questions, they're going to be like, we're not competitive. We need to, have some programming going on. We need to have some training. So, I think it's most important to have like an outlaw program rather than not have one, because, there's not enough, support from, law firms. And, if you think about it, there were a lot of firms where, based on like the, firewall, they were on both sides of issues. They have to, provide, assistance to their clients as they find them. And, so if you want to try to find a corporate law firm that's like, uh, doing the Lord's work, it's not going to be there, because how like the corporations that aren't doing anything wrong are not the ones that need attorneys. So I would just say keep engaging, get more of them on board, invite them to your programs, even when it's not related specifically to, their work, just like get them involved in the things that you're doing, ask them if you can put, their name on your branding, make them publicize, that they're supporting the program, and just keep going to interviews with them, keep making them, have to like come out of their comfort zone. And then, you'll see, people that look like us walking in our, tan Matlock suits, because that's why I'm a lawyer, because of Matlock. And just like bucking the trend at these firms and getting them into, the 21st century. So just keep doing what you're doing. I think it's so important.
Yeah, and the nice thing about engaging the firm, inviting them to the outlaw events or whatever it is then you see who shows up from the firm, and then you perhaps are able to identify allies. And then when students do go to work for the firm, they kind of know who the folks are at the firm who are, you know, ready champions, right? Anybody else have anything to say on that question?
Not seeing any more questions in the chat. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Feel free.
Not to call anyone out, but I saw Hawa come on camera. Did you have a question or you just wanted to share that beautiful face?
No, I didn't have a question, and forgive me, I'm joining a little bit late, but thank you so much for all that you have shared. Especially, you know, the bits towards the end in terms of, you know, what state AG offices are doing, the fact that there are people who are still fighting, there are people who are still engaged, and also that we all have our own respective role to play, right? I think a lot of us are struggling in this moment with, well, what can I do? And I'm just trying to stay grounded in thinking like, I don't have to save the world, but there is something that I can do. So this conversation is leaving me feeling encouraged. So thank you all for your thoughts and your insights.
That's fantastic. Yes, we wanted to end on a high note, you know, on a positive note that is inspiring us to realize that there is support, and you know, the terrible things that are happening are not all sticking. We are pushing back and we are prevailing. So thank you guys so much for the panelists for being here today and sharing with us your work and your insights. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the Washington Council of Lawyers for having this panel as part of the summer forum. And as Chris mentioned, there'll be an email coming around afterward with resources. Before we end, Chris, I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to add.
Just what you had to add. So we'll have a follow-up email that will have additional resources and things for folks to look through, as well as opportunities to connect with our panelists if you have further questions or any inquiries that you want to investigate outside of this space. And I really want to echo David. I really appreciate everyone coming together today as a member of the trans and non-binary community. Sometimes things feel a little heavy these days, and it's nice to be in a space with all of you, and just to have the hour together feels really good. So even just that is going to brighten my day, but much of what we spoke about is also very encouraging and empowering. So thank you.